Welcome to episode 26. This is the Yes You Coaching podcast, and I'm your host, Anna Manning. Today, we're going to be talking about imposter. I hate saying the word syndrome because it isn't a syndrome, and I haven't done an episode on this yet. It's a topic that, for some reason, I find it really difficult to talk about a lot. But I was in a meeting with a load of other coach training providers people, and we were all talking and thinking about stuff that was going to be important in 2023. And one of the big things that they came up with was imposter syndrome. Now, I don't know why it would be that this suddenly is important in 2023. And one person did hazard a guess that the fact that a lot of people have been on their own and they've been away from an office and they've been having to work in different environments, and now they're having to kind of come back in and work in a more traditional environment is unseating people somewhat, and it could be adding to those feelings of worry, those feelings of self-doubt around themselves and their abilities, and just being with other people again, and doing different ways of working, like meeting clients in person and being around other people while working. I don't know about that. Maybe. I know when I was still working in my corporate job, I found it emotionally tiring and a bit stressful to be back in an office with a lot of people. And this is someone I'm very extroverted. But I found it extremely difficult. So maybe that's part of it. But I hazarded a guess that the other part of it is that I think people are starting to feel that it's okay to say it, to admit it. And the more people see it, and the more it is, well, I want to say role modeled, but the more people start saying, oh yeah, I have some of those thoughts. I sometimes feel like an imposter, who are, big cheeses, successful people, all of that. The more of those people that do it, the more everyone else thinks, oh, maybe I can admit it too. And so I hazard a guess that actually that stuff's always been there on the inside, but actually people perhaps haven't said it as much on the outside. It hasn't been as safe or as comfortable for people to do that. And that links really heavily back to all of the work that I do, because the kind of internal stuff, the internal worry, the internal criticism, the doubt, the comparison, the wanting to be acknowledged more and not, like the setting really high standards and making sure everything's perfect, like most of that stuff is all stuff we keep to ourselves. So the widening of the conversation around the imposter syndrome stuff actually is really heartening for me, because I think I bang on about this internal stuff all the time and publicly. But for most of us, it is still something which we don't tell people about, and we don't acknowledge, like these difficulties that we face inside at work that can, hold us back and get in the way of stuff we want to do. But maybe the prevalence of speaking about the imposter syndrome stuff means that the tide is turning, and that we are going to get to a place where people can discuss the internal stuff. They can actually talk about it, they can actually share it, and they can actually seek help with it. And that would be a dream come true for me, because all of this stuff is harder to deal with when you're trying to deal with it on your own. And some of it really thrives in the silence and the secrecy. And actually, when you bring it out into the light, some of it it either crumbles to dust or you can work through. And it doesn't have to have this kind of internal toll on you anymore. So that's what we're doing today. We're turning the tide. This podcast is part of turning the tide. That's a nice thing to think, isn't it? But on with the business of the day. And actually, first, a heads up on two things. So if you're not already in the Grow Your Confidence in 2023 free class, classes, which are happening in January the 4th and the 26th. Sign up now. There's a link in the show notes. This is where all of the stuff that you listen to on the podcast will be like made real and will be built into a personal confidence building plan for you with me live in real time in just 60 minutes. It's going to be great. I've prepped it all. And I've kind of led a couple of people through the exercises that we're doing, and they were super. So I'm quite excited about it. Come and get in the class and really take what you listen to here to another level so you can actually practically apply it and see your confidence growing in 2023. That's what we want. Second is just an announcement that the Confident at Work program is back and the doors are opening for the April group in 30th of January. So on 30th of January, I'm taking bookings for the next round. We haven't done a round since September, which we sold like in June. It feels like ages and ages and ages. So I'm excited. The Confident at Work program is back. For those of you who don't know it, it's a small group coaching and training program for women who want to grow their confidence. It's a paid program. It is my favorite thing to do. It's my favorite work to do with clients. So yeah, if you're looking at really doing this work and you want to come and do it with me, I don't personally recommend you go anywhere else because I just don't. And I'm quite confident about that. Yeah, join the email list and you will shortly get all the details if you're on the email list. So let's go on with the order of the day, imposter stuff. So I did what anyone does and went to Google to do a bit of Googling around the definition. And I looked up imposter first, which is a noun, and it means a person who practices deception under an assumed character, identity, or name. So I just want you to first answer me this question. Is that you? Do you practice deception under an assumed character, identity, or name? I'm guessing that was a no. I wonder if there's any like con artists listening to this that are like, yeah, that's me. That's what I do. But short of that, I'm guessing the answer to that was probably a no. And I think it's important because that's where the word imposter comes from. That's what the word imposter means. So then I looked up imposter syndrome, which I think we have to be a bit careful with because obviously it isn't a syndrome. And having worked previously in healthcare, I think it probably is inappropriate to describe it like that. But yeah, so when you look that up in the dictionary, it's defined as the persistent inability to believe that one's success is deserved or has been legitimately achieved as a result of one's own efforts or skills. So the persistent inability to believe that one's success is deserved or has been legitimately achieved as a result of one's own efforts or skills. And it went on to say it can also be called perceived fraudulence and involves feelings of self-doubt and personal incompetence that persist despite your education, experience, and accomplishments. And to counter these feelings, you might end up working harder and holding yourself to even higher standards. Well, ain't that the truth? That is what I see with this imposter stuff all of the time. And when I think about it with my coaches head on, I've already said this isn't a syndrome, and it isn't. It's some patterns of thinking that create feelings of inadequacy, fear, anxiety, and everything that comes with that. It's just a pattern of thinking. It's some thoughts that are in your mind, which you might believe. You might just assume that they're true. Thoughts like, how did I get here? Am I the right person for this job? I don't know what I'm doing. One day they're all going to find out. Sound familiar? So they're just thoughts in your mind, right? They're just thoughts in your mind. And you might be really used to thinking those thoughts. You might be really practiced at thinking those thoughts. You might think them all the time. You might believe them. You might just assume that because those thoughts pop into your head, they're actually true. That's a bit of a dangerous game. I always say that's like reading the Daily Mail and assuming that everything in it is true. Probably not a good idea. When you're reading the Daily Mail, you want to be a little bit skeptical about the stuff that's in there, and especially how it's being presented. You do the same with the thoughts that come into your brain, because you're not controlling them, are you? They just appear. So be a bit skeptical about these thoughts that are coming into your brain. And if I was going to be like walking you through thinking about some imposter stuff today, this is what I would be. This is the work that I would be doing with you. I would be getting you to think about what those thoughts are for you and like recognize what those thoughts are for you. And then I'd be seeing whether we could unseat them slightly. Could we be a bit skeptical about them? Could we start to question them? Do they have any validity? I was coaching recently, and we got into this, me and the client got into this idea of building evidence for a thought. And I thought that was a really interesting way of looking at it. So almost almost imagining that thought was up on trial, and there were two sides, and one side was giving all of the evidence and the arguments for, and one side was giving all the evidence and the arguments against. And when we looked at some imposter thoughts like that, there really was a lot of evidence against, but that hadn't properly been examined before. And this is what happens with us when we think a thought like, oh my God, I don't know what I'm doing, and we think that thought over and over again, we're not necessarily examining the evidence either way. And what happens when we believe a thought like that, or we just assume that it's true, is that we see all the evidence for how and why that is true, and we miss all the evidence that says that it isn't. Our brains are really amazing at like focusing in on the evidence for stuff that we believe. They're not that great at standing back and being like, could I be wrong about this? Let me see if there's any evidence the other way. And you can see this in terms of our society, right? You can see that we see the evidence for the things that we believe, and we're not always that good at standing back and saying, could I be wrong about this? And like having a nuanced conversation. As individuals, we're usually not very good at it. And as society, we're not that good at it either. But one of the things that you can do on purpose, intentionally, whether you're working with a coach or not, right? If you work with a coach, they're going to do this for you. They're going to help you with the time and the space to do that stand back and be like, what are these thoughts? What are they creating? Is it a result you like? Is it a result you don't like? Some of it, once you really see what's happening, you'll just let it go. And some of it you'll have to learn how to manage or learn how to deal with. But I want to talk a little bit about what can happen when we are believing these kind of imposter type thoughts. And I thought about this and I was like, what do I see people complaining of when they are believing these imposter thoughts like, I don't know what I'm doing, I'm not good enough, I don't know why I'm here, maybe I should never have got this job, one day they're all going to find out. What do I see it creating for them? When I really push them, I'm like, what happens when you believe that? And I came up with quite a few things. See if you recognize any of these in yourself. And the first was overworking as a kind of general catch-all. When I'm believing that I maybe shouldn't be in this job, or maybe I, still need to prove myself, or maybe I'm not good enough, I overwork. So presumably so no one knows. So no one finds out. So I'm able to keep pulling the wool over everyone's eyes. or because I need to overwork because I'm so inadequate as I am. My skills and experience are basically not good enough. So I have to majorly overwork to compensate for it. And we know the problems that overworking can lead to. Interrupts the rest of your life, causes chronic stress, anxiety, gets you feeling all out of balance. So that was one. The other one was the constant need to kind of keep proving yourself even when you have the job. And I've linked this in with the imposter category thing because I think it falls in the same sort of gamut of thoughts. I think it falls like in the same bucket. And now everybody to a degree needs to prove themselves, right? You have to meet your targets and, deliver the things you said you were going to deliver. Like that's normal. That's part of our working world. That's what we get paid for. But with some of the imposter stuff, I see this kind of need to prove that I'm good enough, that that I should be in the role, that they were right to give me the role. I see that over and above what I deliver and what I do and the targets that I meet. I see it being like I'm at 130% of target. I see it like being I've delivered everything I need to deliver, but it's still not good enough because I need to keep proving myself. Another thing that I see the imposter stuff creating is people thinking that they have to know everything and that everything is in capital letters, or assume that they're crap at their job. So it's not acceptable to not know anything. Even when you're new in a job, you should know everything immediately, all the time, and straight away. Otherwise, you're not good enough to be there. You don't know what you're doing. And this is a dangerous thing to think, because how could you possibly ever know everything? And it also breeds a bit of comparison. So you might be looking at other people around you being like, oh God, they always know everything and I don't. But do they know everything? Probably not. That's why we work together. That's why we work in teams. That's why we work with different people with different skills and different knowledge. And do you have to know everything? Or are you already skilled and an expert? And do you know enough to do your job and do it well? The next thing that I see this imposter stuff creating is over preparing, especially around things that are harder to control. So, say you're doing a presentation and you are thinking, oh God, I don't know if I'm good enough to do this. I don't know if I'm the expert. Should I be here? Oh, all of that. The imposter stuff creates the action of over preparing everything, over scripting everything to the nth degree, because you don't trust yourself. So the imposter stuff creates a real lack of trust in your own skills and your own abilities and your own knowledge, such that you have to over prepare. And that's okay if you can over prepare. But what about when there's a scenario where you can't exactly control what's going to happen? And I see people freaking out about things like, oh, I did the prep for the presentation and that was okay because I could over prepare to death. But there's a Q&A at the end of it. So now everyone's going to realize that I really have no idea what I'm talking about, because they're going to ask me all these questions and I'm not going to know the answers. And it means that I'm terrible at my job and I look terrible in front of my clients and yada, 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 yada. So if you find yourself over preparing and freaking out about the bits that you can't control, and a Q&A is just an example, I wonder whether there's some of those imposter thoughts swirling around in the background that are creating a real lack of trust in your knowledge and your skills and your expertise. There's a reason why you're in your job. There's a reason why you got that promotion. There's a reason why you've been given that role. And the reason is because of everything you've done before, because of the skills and knowledge that you've got. But when you're thinking these imposter things, it really unseats that trust. So you're constantly questioning and doubting yourself. Then you have to over prepare. You have to freak out about situations that you can't over prepare for, like Q&As. And this leads me on to the next thing that I see I see imposter stuff creating, which is a lack of trust in your own expertise, judgment, and decisions. And I call this backing yourself. But sometimes people look at me funny when I say that. I think maybe that's just a term that I use. But it means having trust in your own expertise, having trust in your own judgment within that expertise, and having trust within your own decisions. Not having to second guess yourself, not having to wonder whether you're right, not having to seek reassurance from someone else. If you find yourself doing any of those things, and use your what's the word? I can't think of the right word, but it's like use your judgment here, because there are going to be times when you really do need to do that. When you do know that something might be out of your expertise, or you might think, it's legitimate at this point that I'm going to question my judgment, or I'm going to question my own decision, because maybe I don't really know this area, or maybe it is very new to me, or there might be something I'm missing. That is very different from what I see imposter stuff creating, which is that I just don't trust my own expertise, judgment, or decisions, even though I've made these judgments and decisions loads of times before. This is within my expertise. I do know what I'm doing. And the way you might know this is happening is if you have an inclination and you're like, no, I do know what I want to do about this thing, or I do know what my advice or decision would be about that. And then you come in and second guess on the top of it, that might be an indication that actually it's the imposter stuff that's getting in the way. The problem isn't your expertise or your judgment or your decision making. The problem is the fact that those imposter thoughts are unseating all of it. They're creating a lack of trust. And so you're not backing yourself. Or maybe you do until somebody asks a question or challenges you, and then you're like, oh God, maybe they're right, even when they're not. The next thing that I see imposter stuff creating is comparison. And I see this all the time. It's like, oh, well, they know everything and they're experts and they all know this, that, and the other. And I don't. And I'm like, how often is the comparison favorable to you when this imposter stuff's happening? It's always negative. It's always a negative comparison. And if it was helpful or useful, then I'd be all for it. If it helped you to go and learn something new that you then had under your belt, brilliant. But it never does. It's just a stick to beat yourself with. So overall, what I see the imposter stuff creating is a lack of trust, a lot of doubt, and increased stress, increased anxiety, increased exhaustion, and crucially, it lowers your confidence. And it makes total sense when you think about why. So imagine you had someone in your head all day saying, you don't belong here. Why did you get this job? You're a fraud. One day they're all going to find out. Imagine if everyone was saying that to you all the time. What would that be? Like harassment? Bullying? And the thing for most people is, no one is saying that to them. Everyone else is like, yeah, I like working with you. Other people are trusting you more than you're trusting you. And that's what this imposter stuff does. It unseats your trust in yourself when that's where your trust needs to be, because you're the one that's doing everything every day. And it's your confidence in your skills and your abilities and your knowledge and your decisions and your judgment and your expertise. It's that's creating every single thing that you do. Everything you do for your client or your patient or your organization or your team rests on that. And imposter stuff unseats and seeks to destroy that very trust, which is where everything else is created from. And imagine what it does to your confidence. Maybe you don't have to imagine, because you're like, yeah, this is me. I'm hearing myself described in the podcast. Somebody spoke to me about one of the podcasts the other day and they were like, get out of my head, why don't you? I was like, yes, when we've solved all these issues, I will be out of your head. I'll be on my merry way. Do a dance as I'm leaving. But until then, no. And the thing that gets me about the imposter stuff is, like all of this stuff that I help people deal with, it is deal with able. It's fixable because it's not a syndrome. It's some thoughts that you're thinking and believing. It's just some thoughts. That's it. It's just some untested assumptions. That's it. But we just saw from that list that those thoughts and those untested assumptions create a lot. They can wreak havoc. So I'm glad that people in 2023 are apparently going to be thinking about imposter syndrome. Because imagine what you could do if you could just do your job with the knowing that you're good at your job, with the knowing that you have the expertise, you have the skills, you have the knowledge, and you have the damn right to be where you are because of all the things you are, you know, you've done, you've proved. Because that's the truth. Yeah, there might be some people that have got where they've got on a wing and a prayer. Good luck to them. But I bet it's not you. It's never any of the people that I coach. They've got like a long line of proof and evidence as to why they've got where they've got. Makes complete logical sense. It's just the imposter stuff that's getting in the way of remembering that and of knowing that and of that being your belief and that being what you can rest in. But you can get there. Remember, it's just some thoughts that you're thinking and believing. It's literally some sentences in your mind. So how do you handle it? Well, the same way we handle any thinking pattern that's creating a problem. First, we become aware of what we're actually thinking. I'm going to recommend that you write it down. Might look pretty bad written down in black and white, but I'm going to recommend that you do it. And then you want to start to question it. Are these true? And make that a yes or no answer. Don't let your brain double back on you. There might be some thoughts that you really need to stand up to. If you heard someone saying, oh, I don't know how she got this job, she doesn't know what she's doing, to another colleague, what would you say? You'd be like, hang on a minute, that's completely inappropriate, and I won't hear any more of that. You might have to do that with your own brain. But go through the list of ones you've written down and ask if they're fair. Are they fair? Are they reasonable? And strike out the ones that aren't. Become really aware of them so that when they pop into your head in the moment, you can be like, yeah, I did look at that and I decided that it wasn't fair. Some of them will melt away and some of them will remain because you're really used to thinking them and that's just how brains work. But you get to decide whether or not you believe them You might not be able to control what pops into your head, but you get to decide whether or not they're true. The other nice thing you can do is to build your belief in yourself intentionally. So these imposter thoughts have been like running riot and unseating your belief in yourself and your skills and your abilities and your expertise. But what if you intentionally looked at and thought about all the things which go to your expertise being just right for your job? You being in exactly the right place based on your skills and your history and your experience and all the rest of it. Because that's probably true, let's face it. But what our brains have the tendency to do is focus on the imposter stuff, which is unseating our belief, and just ignore all the other stuff. And this isn't like positive affirmations or like pumping ourselves up with stuff that isn't true or that we don't believe. This is just a cold, hard look at the facts. And I'm sure the facts demonstrate that you have every reason to be where you are, and that you do know what you're doing, and that you are able to trust yourself. I bet you that the facts show that. So you need to show that to yourself intentionally. So let's imagine that you have the thought, I'm just not good enough. I want you to turn that thought around to 180. So what would that be? I am good enough. Once you've turned the thought around, once you've done the 180 on it, just find all the evidence for how that's true. All the time. What is the evidence that you are good enough? Well, you got the job. You went through a selection process. You successfully helped a client today. You successfully led a team today. Whatever it is, there'll be evidence left, right, and centre that your brain, trust me, will be ignoring. So let's just bring that into focus. It's almost like focusing some binoculars differently. You might have been intently focusing on the imposter stuff, but let's change the focus and get you to look at the other side of the coin, because it's definitely there. You might want to write this down. You might want to come back to it. You might want to read it every day. Believe me, you can rebuild your neural pathways to focus on those things. You can literally change your brain so it focuses on those things. It's not even difficult. It just requires a bit of effort and a bit of intention, which you can do. And it'll be nice because you'll be looking at it being like, yeah, I think I have done quite well, haven't I? I do know what I'm doing. Believe me, this can become a non-problem. I had a client who coached on this, and she just really flippantly made a remark one day that was like, yeah, well, that's not a problem anymore, but listen to what is. And I was like, how brilliant. This thing that was such a massive problem for her, it's just a non-issue now. Just, it isn't a thing. She's got problems, but they're not that. And you could be the same. And the people that you work with that suffer in this way could also be the same. Solvable issue. If you take nothing away from today other than that, take that away. This is an issue that you can deal with, so that you can go on and deal with the other issues in your life. First step, join that class in January if you haven't already. Or send it to your colleague or your friend or whoever it is that suffers like this. We started by saying at the beginning that maybe people are getting more open to talking about this stuff. And if that's the case, I'm glad. If we can share it, I'm glad, because then you can also share the fact that you now know that this is a solvable issue. I hope that brings you a little bit of hope. You could bring that hope to someone else. All right. That's what I've got for you today. Get in that January class if you're not already in it. Send it to your team if you haven't done already. And I'll see you in next week's episode. Bye.